それではここで基調講演に移らせていただきます。本日はハワイ大学マノア校経済学部名誉教授であるアンドリュー・メイソン先生に世代間経済を理解することの重要性と題してご講演をいただきます。なお講演後は質疑応答のお時間も設けさせていただく予定です。メイソン先生に直接質問を行う貴重な機会となりますので、ぜひ皆様積極的にご質問いただければと思います。本日オンラインで参加の方につきましては、メイソン先生の講演終了までの間に Q&A を送信ください。講演終了後に取りまとめをさせていただきます。それでは講演に先立ちまして、メイソン先生のプロフィールをご紹介させていただきます。メイソン先生のご専門は人口経済学で、ミシガン大学で経済学の博士号を取得。以来、ハワイ大学マノア校にて勤務。経済学部長を務められ、2019年に大学をご退職されましたが、現在も精力的に研究を続けていらっしゃいます。メイソン先生はカリフォルニア大学バークレー校人口学部教授、ロナルド・リー先生とともに NTA の開発を指導されてきました。お二人が立ち上げた NTA は、現在では80カ国以上の研究チームが参加する大規模なものとなっており、NTA グローバルネットワークとして組織化もされています。NTA は人口の年齢構成の変化と世代間の所得移転との関係を測定する大変重要な統計体系となっており、近年では韓国、タイ、コロンビアといった国々で公式統計化も進めています。それではお待たせいたしました。これよりメイソン先生にご講演をいただきたいと思います。どうぞ皆様、盛大な拍手でお迎えください。
And I would also like to thank Dr. Fukuda for his incredible overview of NTA and many of the important details. I am not sure that there's anything left for me to say about national transfer accounts because he's so comprehensively covered the really key elements. And I'm going to try to not go into a lot of details about this. The one other thing I wanted to say is that I am really honored to be here. I am a great admirer of Japan and what this country has accomplished over my lifetime and before I was even alive. And so I've been honored to come here on many occasions. And to be back is always a wonderful experience. Okay, let's see, hit enter. So this is the outline of my talk today. I'm going to talk about two demographic shocks that have influenced the high-income rich world in Japan. And then I'm going to introduce national transfer accounts, going over some of the material that you already heard. I was tempted to talk about Japan, but I looked at the program and realized that that would be foolish. And so I am going to emphasize high-income countries. And so we could draw comparisons to Japan if that would be interesting. And then I'm going to talk about how national transfer accounts has been applied to assess the impact of population change on the economy. Am I going too fast? I hope not. This will just not go into much detail, just mention a couple of examples. And so that hopefully we'll have some time left for Q&A. So, two demographic shocks. Well, one is the demographic transition that would be familiar to almost anybody in this room, I imagine. So we had this decline in mortality and fertility that we've experienced around the world. And this has led to very important changes in age structure. First, an increase in the number of children because of big declines in infant and child mortality. The second impact was an increase in the number of prime-age adults as those young children grew up and entered the labor market and began to produce. And third, we are in the final phase of the demographic transition that we're here, an increase in the old age population due to decline in fertility and due to increase in longevity. So this has led to aging that we're experiencing now, but it's important to keep in mind that it has also led to slower population growth overall and negative growth, which I think maybe Japan has begun to experience now. Is that right? So not many countries are yet experiencing negative decline, but Japan is, and a few others. So that's the first demographic shock. But there's another demographic shock that we see in the data sometimes. It's quite important, and that's the baby boom and the subsequent baby bust. So that happened in Japan, I guess, around 1950, and it lasted throughout the 50s when the total fertility rate declined to around replacement level, I think, in 1959. The baby boom was similar in the United States. It lasted a little bit longer, going from 1946 to 1964. So I'm a baby boomer myself, so I wanted to talk about that today. So what did that do? Well, it led to a large increase in the number of children during those years. And it led to not just that one increase, but it led to waves in population age structure because those children became mothers and fathers, and they had their own, they produced children themselves. And so this led to swings in population growth that we see in data. Okay, so I said all of this already, sorry. Okay, so why do demographic shocks affect the economy? Well, the life cycle is fundamental. That's why we had that nice graphic on your program, which shows that there are children and there are prime age adults and there are seniors, and their roles in the economy are different. So NTA is designed to show the influence of those changes in age structure on the economy. There are several examples. Shifts in the number of people at each age affect consumption, both total consumption and the composition of consumption. So a lot more spending on healthcare in the future than in the past, for example. It affects production because of changes in labor force that naturally occur because of changes in age structure. It leads to changes in intergenerational transfers. If you look at a country in Africa, you see huge transfers from prime age adults to young people. Whereas if you look at Japan, you are beginning to see the opposite, where the reallocations and transfers are going from prime age adults up to seniors. And we see changes in capital markets, for example. I don't think we fully understand those yet, but it's something that I'm interested in. Sung Yap and I have done some work on this, looking at debt and saving and those kinds of things. And there are many other issues here that this doesn't include. So let me now give you an overview of national transfer accounts. So the purpose of NTA we have defined in the following way. It is to measure how people at every age acquire and use economic resources to meet their material needs, to support others, and to provide for the future. And so I think everything that we talk about here is encompassed in this definition. So I think it's very helpful to understand this. And also you can see, I think, the connection between this and the system of national accounts, if you're familiar with that. There are many ways that this overlaps with that. Okay, so national transfer accounts, it provides estimates of economic flows at all ages, typically single years of age from 0 to 90 plus. Some countries, they can't quite go up to 90 plus, and so they cut it off at an earlier age. Sweden researchers think they can go to 110, but I don't know about that, but they do it. And so NTA is constructed to maintain consistency with national accounts. It's not the same. It's not taking national accounts and breaking it down by age. It's different, but in many ways it's consistent. And as Dr. Fukuda pointed out, NTA consists of two accounts. There's a life cycle account, which quantifies consumption and production at each age, and importantly, looks at the balance between those as a driving force in national transfer accounts. And the second account is the reallocation account that quantifies how resources are shifted across age to fund deficits for the young and for seniors. So this is the life cycle account. These are per capita values, and this is an average for high-income countries. So the labor income profile is not surprising. It goes up when people, as they enter their 30s and 40s, and then it peaks, and then it goes down. It goes down kind of younger than I thought it would when I first started this work. You know, I'm thinking people work until they're 60 or 65 and then it declines. But actually in the cross-sectional data, it goes down at an earlier age than this, maybe in the 50s. And then we can look at consumption and we see lower consumption for children. And then a surprising thing is how even it is across adult ages when we look at all countries combined. So there's not this great intergenerational inequality that one might expect to see, because maybe people in younger generations made a lot more than old people did when they were young, or maybe because old people are now earning a lot more than young people are, so maybe they're going to consume a lot more. Well, we don't see too much in this average data. We see different things when we look at individual countries, though. And then we see this rise in consumption with age. Now, when before I started this work, I thought the common wisdom was that consumption declined at older ages. And we often, you know, I don't know, financial planners used to tell people, well, you should plan on consuming 80 cents for every dollar you consumed when you were young. Well, I'm not doing that. I'm consuming more than I did when I was young. And we see in the cross-section that that's true as well. A lot of this is healthcare, but not all of it. So I don't know that I need to talk about that. This shows the surplus is in those prime ages, and the deficit is at young and old ages. And let's just move along. I don't want to get bogged down into technical things. So that's the life cycle account, and in a way it sets the stage for saying, well, this is the basic life cycle problem. This is the problem that we face in our economy that we haven't given enough attention to in the past. So what is the reallocation account? Well, we need a solution to the life cycle problem. We need ways or systems that we can take resources that are in surplus when we are healthy and relatively young, and we can work a lot, and we can raise kids, and we can do it all, and give it to people who are not yet developed, children, and people who are becoming infirm and are less capable and don't want to work anymore. And so we need these mechanisms, and we don't have a full accounting of what those are without national transfer accounts. So there are three sources that I want to emphasize. You can organize this in different ways, but I'm going to organize it by talking about three sources. One is you can rely on assets, and then the second is private or family transfers, and the third is public transfers. So I'm trying to, okay, I see. I think I'm okay on time. All right, so assets, well, that's just the basic idea behind assets is that when you are working, you can save and you can accumulate resources that you can use to support yourself when you are old. So you might do that as an individual. And a lot of us, for example, buy a home, and then we accumulate equity in that home, and then we can live in that home. Maybe right now I own my home. I don't have to pay on my home anymore. We might have assets that we accumulate in a funded pension program. Maybe our employer provides resources that fund our retirement. So those would be examples. It may come from saving, but it may also come from inheritance. Many people receive resources from previous generations that they can then use to fund themselves if they want. Private transfers are very important, especially for children. And so that just is individuals or couples or families or whatever, they take money and they use it to support their kids. Now, the way we measure things, we include in-kind transfers. So it's not just cash. It's also the housing, the food, the clothing, et cetera, that children are provided by their parents or by their grandparents. Private transfers can work the other way, too. We may have well-off younger adults providing support to seniors. And then an important thing is, of course, public transfers, which are heavily health care and pensions. So I think I've kind of covered this slide. Apologies to the translators for not sticking to my script. And then we have another slide that shows some of the examples that I just talked about: assets, private transfers, and public transfers. One thing I neglected to say about assets is that I've combined public and private assets in this. And so public assets could include resources generated if the government goes into debt, for example, runs a big deficit. that is a way that can be used to fund consumption needs of children or seniors. And I believe that's something that people talk a lot about in Japan, as we do in the United States. So we represent reallocations using this triangle, the reallocation triangle. So on each point, we have the three main reallocation possibilities that I've identified. One, we have asset-based reallocations at the top and private family transfers on the leftmost side. And then we have public transfers on the right side. So I'm going to show you data for countries in a minute. And if a country were right here, it would mean that it's relying entirely on public transfers. Over here, we're entirely on private transfers, and here entirely on asset-based reallocations. If you are in the middle of this triangle, that would mean that you're relying equally on these three sources, these three forms of reallocations. Now, I'm going to not talk about reallocations to children. I'm just going to talk about reallocations to seniors. And what we'll see is that the reallocations for seniors, depending on the country, fall along this axis sort of broadly speaking. So the big trade-off is between public transfer programs and between asset reallocations. And family transfers are playing a less important role than I thought would be the case. So this is the reallocations for how many ever countries that is. These are the countries for which we have, this is the most recent data, and except for Japan. That's not the most recent data for Japan, but we'll have that up there pretty soon. So let me kind of look at certain areas. So within that box, we're talking about countries that are mostly relying on assets to fund old age needs. So the U.S. is kind of just barely sneaks into that area. We see Mexico, South Africa, India, Cambodia, Philippines. It's kind of a hodgepodge group, but mostly lower income countries, U.S. excluded from that. Then we have the next group are more balanced between public transfers and assets. And we see countries like Great Britain and Russia and Japan and Australia, Uruguay, Slovenia, Thailand, Costa Rica, and MD. I wonder what that is. Moldova? Do we have data for Moldova? Maybe, I don't know. And then finally, let's see. We have those that are relying heavily on transfers. Well, that tends to be European countries, and it tends to be Latin American countries. And so I think I have a, let's see. Let's see. I wanted to point out something. I wanted to point out Singapore, which is kind of an interesting outlier, and I was very surprised by this. This is Singapore right here, and they're not relying. They're relying on about a third on assets and about 2/3 on family transfers, and not on public transfers at all. So it's a very unusual case that distinguishes it from the rest of the world, really. Okay. So more information about this, you can go to the NTA website, www.ntaccounts.org. You can talk to individual researchers. We list all of the researchers there that so you can contact them if you have questions. They're the ones that construct these accounts. So don't ask me, questions about a particular country. You have to talk to them. And there's also detailed methods and training materials and conferences and workshops and a lot of other things that may be of interest to people. I'm going to skip that because Sung Yap's going to present that slide. This is the NTA manual, the UN. If you want the NTA manual, do you have any copies of this, Nicole? I have a couple. So you could get one from me, but it's better to go online and get the electronic version anyway. And then this is the book that was done by Ron and I and a whole bunch of authors, too many to mention. Okay, now let me just quickly talk about extensions and applications. So one of the things that we did before anything else was to talk about demographic dividends. And we thought it was useful to talk about first and second demographic dividends. And I have 5 minutes left. That should be fine. So, does that to allow for my Q&A? Okay. The first dividend has to do with the fact that we get an increased concentration of population in the working ages. So that's reflected in the fact that the support ratio goes up. And the first dividend in growth terms is measured as the rate of growth in the support ratio. So we know that's a transitory phenomenon. It happened in the middle of the demographic transition, but it's ending as we get aging. This is a picture of the support ratio and the first dividend. So the support ratio is the line, the first dividend are the bars. This is for China from 1980 to 2060. And you can see that it was very high, around 1990 or something like that. It's now ended in China. You see this two-humped thing going on here. And that's why I wanted to talk about two shocks, because this has to do with rapid decline in infertility in China. I have same thing for Japan here. I changed the time scale here. So this is 1960 to 2040. The graph for China started in 1980. But we can see the main features of the first dividend in Japan, where the peak impact on the growth rate was in the 1970s or so. And then it was dissipated entirely, really, by around 1990. I'm going to go over my time a little bit, so don't bother me too much. Okay, now what about the second dividend? Well, that has to do with the fact that there are changes in the number of workers, but there are also changes in the productivity of those workers that can be traced directly to changes in age structure or the decline in the rate of growth of the population. So there's two reasons that have been talked about a lot in the economics literature. One is that slower growth in the labor force leads to increase in capital per worker. And so this leads to higher labor productivity that naturally arises. The reason is because investment can be concentrated in a smaller labor force rather than being used to equip new workers. The other thing arises from what's called the quantity-quality trade-off in the economics literature. And the idea is that as people, as we go through development, people opt to have fewer kids, but to spend more on each child. And much of that goes into human capital investment, and that leads to productivity increase. Okay, so now the second thing I wanted to talk about was a paper that a lot of us were involved in, thank you, called Is Low Fertility really a Problem? We published this in Science 10 years ago or so. And it traces the impact of age structure on the support ratio, on the fiscal support ratio, and on consumption. And what we found here was that high fertility sort of favors public finances because a lot of public finances go to support seniors. And so you would like to have, if you're really worried about public finances, you would like to have a somewhat higher rate of population growth. Moderate fertility, somewhat above replacement, maximizes the support ratio or the first dividend. And, but the most important thing is to maximize standards of living as we measure by consumption. So moderately low fertility maximizes consumption. And here are some data for a number of countries. Let me just point out Japan. So at the time of this writing, the TFR was about 1.34, it says. I guess it's not much different from that now, is it? So the fertility that would maximize consumption depends on the assumptions that you make, but it varies from 1.8 to 1.52. So the point here is that in terms of standards of living, replacement fertility is not what you're necessarily aiming for. In fact, fertility well below replacement is not bad for the economy. Now, of course, that does eventually, as Elon Musk likes to talk about, eventually leads to no people, but that's generations and generations in the future. And so I'm not worrying about that too much yet. So the assumption, I think, the implications of this, I think I've already stated. So the human capital spending I talked about earlier, let me just show you one slide here from NTA data. This shows human capital spending, health and education by age for 4 income groups. This is high income countries here, and this is low income countries here. So there is a really stunning increase in spending on human capital at young ages and at old ages as we go through this demographic change. So there are lots of different extensions and applications. We have people here who are deeply involved in this work, and so that's relieved me from having to talk about it. and it also relieved you from having to listen to me talk about it. So I want to say a final word about Japan and the origins of NTA. So NTA was started about 20 years ago, and there was really a small group of us that worked on that. In the first funded research, we had 7 countries that we were estimating NTA for. And Japan was one of the very first members of this NTA group. And they made many important contributions to its development, not just as showing us the results for Japan, but also helping us to refine our approach that we were going to take to NTA. NUPRI really took the Nihon University Population Research Institute, Hiro, who I don't see, he was here a minute ago, and Ricky were leaders of that team, and so they also helped and led the regional team for Asia for quite a few years, so that was very helpful. But I've been very excited to see ISPP. Okay, thank you. Pick up this challenge and really take it further so that now we're going to be seeing results for 35 years, not just the 5 years that we saw earlier today. And that's very exciting. And I've actually been looking at that data myself before I came here. So there are a lot of really interesting things and important things going on because Japan is really in the forefront of aging and coming up with ways to deal with the economic problems that we are going to face as we go on. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mason. Now we'd like to move on to the Q&A session. それではここからは質疑応答に移りたいと思います。質疑応答の取りまとめに関しましては福田室長にお願いしたいと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、メイソン先生どうもありがとうございました。Thank you, Andy, for your great presentation. それでは、今から10分ほど、あるいはもう少し短い時間になってしまうかもしれませんけれども Q&A の時間を取りたいと思います。どなたかご質問がある方は、挙手をお願いします。ご質問の際には、ご所属とお名前をおっしゃっていただいた上で、ご質問をお願いします。質問は英語でも日本語でも構いません。どなたかご質問ありませんでしょうか。お願いします。
じゃあ日本語で、国立社会保障人口問題研究所の西村と申します。今日はですね政策関わっておられる方もちょっとたくさん来ておられるということで、それに関わる質問を一点したいと思います。それで政策利用の最前線というのはあると思うんですけれども、今メイソン先生のスライドの中に拡張の方向性として公共政策の分析のようなことがちょっとスライドの下の方で挙げられてたと思うんですけれども、私応用計量経済学とかをやっているんですが、個々の政策の因果関係、つまりそのメイソン先生たちが開発した指標と今実際現場で行われている政策との因果関係を検証するってことはそんなに簡単なようにちょっと思われなかったんですけども、もし何かその因果関係の検証に関してこれから拡張していくという意味で何かコメントお考え、実際そのアメリカの方でそういった因果関係を検証して実際その行われた政策が実際この指標をもとにうまく評価されたっていう事例はあるのかどうか、それをお伺いしたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。
ありがとうございます。
Well, that's a very good question. There are some things that aren't behavioral in nature. So there are some economic mechanisms that are part of NTA that I think get ignored. And so one of the things, for example, that I'm working on right now and presenting in a workshop tomorrow is to look at how if aging, if we try to maintain current levels of consumption in the face of aging, that it's really will violate fundamental constraints in the economy, and that either consumption has to go down or saving has to go up, and those are linked to each other. And so so I think that sort of thing is useful. Then the other one thing that's very useful, I think, is just to try to get people to be more forward-looking about the policy formulations that they come to. So you ask about the United States, for example. Well, the fiscal problems for our public pension and health care programs are very severe, yet we are not doing anything to address those. And so I think one of the things that U.S. analysis can show, for example, is what sort of impacts that would be and how important it is to not just, to use a colloquial expression, to not just kick the can down the road. I've also been struggling with this, doing some work in Hawaii to look at state and local issues and what kind of policies they need to be thinking about. And it hasn't, I don't run regressions anymore. I don't do that. I did at one time, but I don't anymore. And I don't know quite how to do that when it comes to thinking about policy and for a particular state. I can kind of point out problems and I can talk about what some possible solutions are, but that's sort of my limitation. And so I'd be very interested to see the kinds of things that you're trying to bring in order to do that.
Thank you, Andy. Is there 他に質問等ございませんでしょうか? Okay, so I think I'm going to take advantage of being a moderator and to give you some questions. So you just showed us that the low fertility is not so bad in terms of a high standard of consumption. And then you show the table, but could you just tell us like how low fertility could be in terms of a higher standard of consumption? And is there any other conditions than low fertility to explain the higher standard of consumption? That's my question.
Well, I could back this up, but I won't do that. So Korea is best off in this calculation, that their total fertility rate could be 1.2, and they would have high consumption. Of course, that's a lot higher than fertility is in Korea right now, so it doesn't fully satisfy their problems. But the other thing to understand is the reason why very low TFR in Korea is okay is because the spending on seniors is not very high. It's much, much higher in Japan and the United States than it is in Korea, relative to what prime-age adults are consuming, for example. So I don't think that's a long-time solution for Korea. I think in Korea, over time, that the spending on seniors will go up, and the costs of having an aging population will be greater.
Yeah, thank you. So when you say the fertility, are you going to look at the period fertility rate, or you rather think that the cohort fertility rate should be a good, better measure?
Well, using cross-sectional, this is all cross-sectional data that we've been looking at, and that's a bit of a problem. We would rather look at longitudinal data, but then how do you do that exactly? We can look at, we have 35 years for Japan now, and for the United States, what do we have, Gretchen, 40 some years? 35 years for the United States. And so it allows you to construct longitudinal profiles, and it would make sense to match it up with longitudinal fertility data. But it's not easy to do that analysis, and I always get nervous when I think about trying to do that, because you can look at a segment of some cohort's existence, but you're always going to be looking at pieces over their lifetime. And, well, I think it's very important to do that, but I think it's a kind of a complement to doing cross-sectional data.
お願いします。
Maybe I'll say in English, maybe, because today in the most important graph does not include assets. But still I have a bit difficulties in understanding how the asset is firstly measured and incorporated in this balance of labor, income, and consumption. So maybe I would imagine that assets element has been incorporated a bit later, maybe, and then I would like to know how you have come up to this idea, incorporating assets. And also the second point is that, don't you have any problem of measuring assets in different country settings?
Well, yes, to answer the second question. And that's one of the reasons, well, if we were just doing this work for Japan and the United States and some other similar countries, maybe we would have put more priority on assets. When we start talking about a lot of other countries, particularly developing countries, the data on assets is very limited, and so that makes it hard. On the other hand, from a conceptual perspective, I couldn't agree with you more. We would like to have what we call wealth accounts. And actually, wealth accounts are in the UN manual, how we would construct wealth accounts. And we haven't, Ron has done an awful lot of work, Ron Lee has done an awful lot of work on this. And one of the things that we do is by wealth, we include both assets and financial and real assets, but we also include what we call transfer wealth. That when you look at a cohort, it can generate obligations from future generations that exceed what liabilities they have to pay to future generations. And so wealth accounts in NTA would want to include those. So there is a paper by Ron and David McCarthy, Gretchen, and yeah, what's his name? I forgot. Yeah, James Sefton, and I think Gretchen has actually worked on that quite a bit, constructing wealth accounts for the United States and for Great Britain. So you might look at that if you wanted to follow up. Is that in the Journal of Economics of Aging? Or no, I don't. Is that where it is? So you're absolutely right. I mean, that's something that we would like to do a lot more of.
Thank you, Andy. I think it's about the time to close this lecture. So thanks, Andy, again for your great lecture. Please give him a great applause.